So the model itself hasn't changed. What has changed is all of the different ways that we contextualize ADKAR. So whether it's project milestones, you mentioned waterfall versus agile, where you can have knowledge and ability outcomes at each release or sprint. You can embed ADKAR from, a milestone project planning perspective. You can also use it as a diagnostic framework to go back and examine what went wrong and what can we do better the next time. So I think it's more in the applications of ADKAR and going way beyond, right? If it's an onion, you're just peeling back all of the layers.
Welcome to the Inner Game of Change, the podcast that explores the evolving landscape of change management, leadership, and transformation. I am your host, Ali Juma. In this episode, I am joined by the remarkable Karen Ball, Senior Fellow at Prosci and author of the ADKAR Advantage, Your New Lens for Successful Change. Released in April 2024, Karen's book offers a fresh and practical take on navigating change by embracing the power of the Prosci ADKAR model. With over 40 years of experience, Karen has helped countless individuals and organizations unlock the real benefits of successful change, both professionally and personally. As a seasoned change advisor, instructor, and CCMP professional, Karen brings a wealth of knowledge, energy, and passion to the conversation. Today, we will unpack Karen's insights from her book, explore why the ADKAR lens is more relevant than ever, and hear some real-world lessons from her extensive journey in the field of change. I am grateful to have Karen chatting with me today. Well, Karen, thank you so much for joining me in the Inner Game of Change podcast. I am grateful for your time today.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here. Appreciate it. Thank
you so much, Karen. So lovely to get another professional from the Prosci Institute. And we're going to talk about the ADKAR, reimagined, I suppose I can say that. And that's based on your new book. But before we start talking about the book and the content and which angle you're tackling, it would be fantastic for you to introduce yourself to my audience.
Sure. Thank you. Well, it's such a pleasure to be here. And to your listeners, there's so many amazing topics that you've covered through the years. And I know one of the things that comes up often when you talk to people in the discipline of change or change management is, what is everybody's origin story coming into this discipline? Many of us have found our way to this discipline from another path. And for myself, I was spending time in the information technology space. So for, a little over 20 years, I was working in the technology space of information management, information compliance, working with a systems integrator who was out there developing and delivering, multi-million-dollar solutions for organizations to help them manage their information more effectively. And I kept getting tripped up by what I saw was a significant problem across all industries and across all organizations, which is so much attention was paid to the solutions and the way the solutions were being developed and delivered. And time and attention was not given to the people to prepare them for those solutions, to help them come alongside. And I actually called it end user advocacy. I didn't even know what the discipline was, right? I just knew that there was a big missing hole, which is how do we support people through those change journeys that they have to go on when they work with an organization who is in continuous improvement or responsive to challenges that sit in their marketplaces or their industries. So I got introduced to change management, and I knew that was the place I belonged because I am such an empathic connector for people who are impacted by change. And then you added structure and discipline and research and knowledge and understanding and learning that the change is can be modeled, and successful change can be modeled and repeated. So when I found change management, I knew I found my home, and I've been working in the discipline of change management since 2006, working with just about every industry, lots of different types of changes. And I joined Prosci in 2016 as I was using and leveraging almost all of the full suite of models and methodology and tools from Prosci. And I really found that they were the most applicable and accessible and effective. And so I joined Prosci and have been part of the product team, the executive team, and then over the last year and a half had an opportunity to rewrite or provide an update to the original ADKAR book that was written in 2006. So I find myself here from an IT background. And of course, the focus is on people and the adoption side of the story.
I think we all come from different backgrounds, and we usually land in this beautiful discipline. Let's talk about your book. You looked at the book that was published in 2006, and then you decided that it's time for a revision, an upgrade, a new way of looking at this. And this is a Prosci's attempt to upgrade, to make the framework ADKAR more relevant to the current situation. So just walk us through very quickly about with your journey around writing the book.
Yeah, it was anybody who's written a book has stories to tell. But it was an opportunity. The first book was published in 2006, and Jeff Hyatt, who is Prosci's founder and actually the creator of the Prosci ADKAR model, it was his first publication to fully disclose, unpack, describe, apply all of the different ways that he was bringing the ADKAR model to life. And of course, almost 20 years has passed since he wrote that first book. And what has happened since Jeff published the ADKAR book in 2006 is, of course, we want to continue to amplify the promise of ADKAR, the promise of having an individual model that allows people to make sense of change and to find their way through change at the individual level. There's also, the proof of ADKAR. There's been almost 20 years of demonstrated benefit in organizations around the world. So when I was preparing the book, I wanted certainly to introduce Prosci's new research as a research organization. There's lots of new validations or extensions of ADKAR from a research perspective. But the promise is all about the outcomes and what people are realizing as a result inside of the proof and the evidence. So from promise to proof. And I collected stories in the book. So I reached out to Prosci customers and clients around the world. There's over 50 ADKAR stories, 20 countries, 6 continents, just about everywhere around the world, lots of different industries, to have people share their outcomes of applying ADKAR, both individually and organizationally, personally and professionally. So the proof and the examples and the success stories are critical. And then, of course, the practice. We wanted to take more extension around how change practitioners leverage recommendations and guidance to help lead and guide organizations through those individual change journeys. So I'd say what's new, better, different in the update is more around the promise, the proof, and the practice.
That's a huge undertaking for you to go around and ask for stories and validations. And you would have heard the good stories. What would be some of the misconceptions that you've come across, when you talk about ADKAR to practitioners and non-practitioners?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, one of the things that's a clarifying point that we continue to talk about. I hear lots of people say the ADKAR methodology. We follow the ADKAR methodology. Well, actually, ADKAR is a model. And just for your listeners who may not be familiar, it is an acronym, and it stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And when Jeff was originally imagining this, what he was doing, it was interesting. He was studying the change patterns inside of organizations in the late 1990s. And he was fascinated by the question of why do some changes succeed and other changes fail? So he started researching. He's an engineer, so the question was really challenging to him. So he looked at change patterns across, 700 organizations over 4 years and started coming to, the pattern spotting anytime you look at a significant amount of data and information. And what he discovered is that the secret to successful change is in how we support every single person who's impacted by change going through their own change journey. And that's what ADKAR represents, is the individual model for change. And then as a methodology, it sits inside of the Prosci methodology, which is a 3-phase process that goes into greater detail about engagement and preparing an approach and looking at the risk of a change from a people perspective, articulating, how to engage senior leaders and people managers and to do communications and training, and then assessing whether or not the change is successful and adapting as you go along the way. So ADKAR, one of the misconceptions is ADKAR is a methodology and that's all there is, but it's actually the model. It's a model that describes the individual change process, and it helps us make sense of change, and it helps us know if the things that we're doing are working. So it informs what to do, who should be doing it, what we should say, how we should engage, and then we can measure our accomplishment through an ADKAR journey and determine if it's working. So again, I continue to the words sense making, right? ADKAR helps us make sense of change at the individual level, and it's wayfinding. So we can scan and act, right? We can scan and say, oh gosh, everybody's really not able to articulate very clearly why a particular change is needed. We need to go back and make sure our communications are from the right senders with the right messages, hitting people at the right times with the right information to help them go through awareness at the very beginning of the model. So that's one of the misconceptions. So the other thing is it's all we need. ADKAR is the helper model. I think of it like, so if you're going on a hike, right? And we're doing a big hike, you might need a compass, right, to keep you on path. So ADKAR is like a compass. But if you're doing a big, complex hike, it'd probably be useful to also have a trail guide and a map, right? Maybe you need a topography that tells you what the elevations are across the hike. So ADKAR keeps us continuously pointed in the right direction, but we incorporate lots of other elements in the process of change management to make sure we're getting to the destination of our hike, which is the end where successful change is found.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Join Dr. Bill Howitt in his new podcast dedicated to empowering employers with the knowledge and tools to protect and promote mental health in the workplace. The Exploring Workplace Mental Health show considers issues relating to capacity building. Tune in as Dr. Bill delves into the why, what, and how of fostering a mentally healthy work environment. Each episode provides employers and decision makers with actionable insights and strategies to create a supportive culture that empowers employees. Subscribe to the podcast now to access the latest episodes.
I want to ask you a question around what is the adverse effect of people calling it a methodology rather than a model?
Yeah, I think they lose some of the nuance of its context, right? In a simple change, just articulating an ADKAR journey can be quite useful to determine, awareness. We just communicate why now, what if we don't? Desire is about the personal choice that every person makes to come alongside a change, right? To embrace it. Knowledge is knowing how, ability is being able, and then reinforcement is to sustain the change. And I think we just miss some of the opportunity for the nuance of why change management activities engagement of leaders, engagement of key influencers, communication, training, integration with change agent networks, all of the different levers that we might pull inside of a change strategy or set of change management plans, that ADKAR is our compass to keep us on track. So I think it's just, ADKAR works, in an individual change, working with a personal scenario, right? ADKAR is quite powerful, but I think it's just the intensity of taking it into the discipline of change management and how much more we are able to focus our time and attention on the right things at the right time to deliver the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So it's just a difference of a compass that keeps us on point and right in direction versus all of the other supporting resources that might surround ADKAR to accomplish a particular change and deliver outcomes to an individual or an organization.
Karen, from the number of interviews and interactions that you've had with the clients over the years, I want to ask you two questions. One is that where have you seen ADKAR being applied and you thought this is really a creative way of applying ADKAR? And the second question, I suppose, is where would most organizations struggle? Is it in the awareness? Is it from the knowledge to ability, that transfer? The microphone is yours.
Yeah. So to your first question, right, some really creative examples of ADKAR application. As I said, I collected, over 50 stories coming into the creation of the book, and I was going through and reading them. And it was quite fascinating how people had done, in different countries with cultural adaptations. There was an organization in Japan that, again, culturally, things are different for businesses inside of Japan versus some other countries. So the way that they developed a grassroots effort around a particular set of changes, and it was employee driven. They felt like they weren't able to connect all the dots, if you will, between lots of different changes that were going on. So they started, crowdsourcing information from lots of different sources so that it became people impacted by change, helping other people impacted by change versus a top-down approach. So it was very interesting. It was all around, awareness of why now, what if we don't? Most of them were fully engaged in trying to support the changes and then getting the knowledge and ability tasks. There's another organization that decided not to introduce the language of ADKAR. They didn't want to create the common language that's so frequently adopted across organizations because they just didn't want to, have to go and talk to every person in the organization leveraging ADKAR as the language. But yet they took the steps of ADKAR without describing it. So, for example, they talked about a workshop that they delivered for lots of people who were impacted by a significant change. And they had everybody self-mark on a poster, I'm fully aware of why this change is happening, or I have chosen to participate and to come alongside this change. I know how to do what I'm being asked to do. And people were just marking each of those. And little did they know they were actually doing an ADKAR assessment so that the people who were implementing that change could step back and go, oh my gosh, an awful lot of people are not understanding why we're doing this and haven't chosen to participate. We've got awareness and desire barriers. So then they went back and focused on, filling the gaps and making sure they were delivering the information that was needed to help everybody through those two critical aspects, because it's a sequential model. If you don't have awareness and desire, it's not email on Monday for training on Tuesday for go live on Wednesday, right? You give people a chance to understand the change, come alongside it, and then develop their knowledge and ability to reinforce it. There's an organization that's in there. It's a pharma, a global pharmaceuticals organization with 50,000 people impacted by, they said, almost 1,500 digital migrations into a completely new technical platform. And they completely architected that change effort through the lens of ADKAR. They described every impacted group's change journey and activated all of the steps and actions around ADKAR journeys. So, quite large and complex, all the way down to individual change. There's a story in the book of a gentleman by the name of Graham who taught himself to swim in his 30s. His wife challenged him that was a life skill she wanted him to have as they were stepping into parenthood. And so he tells a funny story about going through his own learning journey of learning how to swim with awareness and desire. And so much of it was the knowledge to ability, being, knowing what you're supposed to do to swim, but being able to swim are two different things. And then, of course, reinforcement, having that skill and keeping up that skill. So lots of different stories, lots of different examples. I think the common pattern in all of this is that ADKAR allows us to make change, which can be quite complex at the organizational level. And it makes it personal and individual. And that's why so many change practitioners work with the ADKAR models. It's simple to describe. It resonates with people because it captures the essence of what truly is the process of change. It's also very actionable and it builds a lot of confidence. Your question about where do people get stuck? Most of the time, lots of the times that I'm doing ADKAR journeys for personal change, we teach ADKAR through applying it to a personal change, a friend, a family member, a neighbor, a colleague, someone in our close circle who's struggling with a change. And oftentimes when you put it in the context of a personal change, people come back with desire as the hardest step, right? The choice that we all make to participate and engage in a change. And that's because, what needs to be clear is how does this resonate with me, my personal motivators? What's in it for me? What is the reason that I want to choose to participate in this change? Inside of organizations, a lot of times the barrier or the place where people get stuck or we encounter a lot of resistance is right at awareness, because organizations aren't necessarily great at articulating why for a change. Not that a change is happening, right? We're going to implement a new ERP system. Great. Why are we implementing this system? What are the organizational benefits? What are the project objectives? Why should I want to come alongside this change in support of the health of the organization? So desire often shows up in personal changes as the barrier, but a lot of times it's awareness right at the front end of the ADKAR model. And once we unlock that, it's very clear what the steps are and what people need and how you can support them through their ADKAR journeys and the tailored interventions that come out of it. If I've got a particular employee, for example, who just isn't connecting and they're not coming alongside the change, you can go in with very specific coaching conversations and find those interventions to help them through their ADKAR journey.
And these interventions are very critical because ADKAR is not a linear process. So sometimes you create an awareness and you think you've informed everyone, and then you do, some pulse check, sense making, and then you discover that you probably need to go back to the awareness and create that. And because organizations change, especially when you're driven by lots of complex things happening within the organization. My personal experience, Karen, is that, and I always think that is a good test of a good change management practitioner, is that jump from the knowledge to ability. Do I know what I need to do? Yes, I know. Do I know how to do it? And unfortunately, that is usually sacrificed because a project has got a timeline, they've got a budget, they've got a scope, that they need to finish. So there's always this tension between the change managers trying to spend more time to, bridge that gap. And then you've got the project manager saying, we've got only 2 weeks to do that. And my counsel has always been, we need to be fully aware between what learning is and what training is, and then the application of all of these. And that's where the secret. So I always think that most of my observations anyway, working with other change managers, is that we pretty much okay with the awareness and create what's in it for the people. But unfortunately, sometimes we move very quickly through that particular period or those two stages of the model. And because we move very quickly and then we spend very minimum time in reinforcement and then we leave it. And then as you and I would know.
And that's the problem, right? I mean, the change is actually real when it's happening, right?
Exactly.
Up to that point, I can only imagine, right? I went to training and I learned what I'm supposed to know how to do, but just because I know how doesn't mean I'm able. And that knowledge to ability gap is one that we see organizations push far too quickly through. And, just as you've said, right? Well, what about the time to do that? We've got new measurement. We've got new performance criteria, whether it's a mindset or a process or a tool or, there's an adoption piece that happens after the change is instantiated, right? It's very real to me what's happening. And what I'd say is if you don't do that work, right? If you don't do the work of filling the gap from knowledge to ability, and that could be a very small gap, or it could be, quite large, depending on the nature of the change, you're going to pay for it somehow, right? You're going to have less than complete adoption. You're going to have people pushing back and demonstrating resistance and sometimes even, trying to sabotage the change itself because they're not able to do what they're being asked to do. So you'll pay for it some way, through a rework, a relaunch, a redo, a retreat, where we retreat from the change because there's so much demonstrated pushback. And then you just create more of a history of failed change. And that's one of the things that makes me, sad for organizations when they don't do the right things and they continue to create this history of failed change, which erodes trust. And trust is really hard to regain once it's eroded. So, to just sit down and figure out what is the knowledge to ability gap and how are we going to support people? And we can be quite creative, with coaching or peer influences or time away from desk work to get into learning mode, right? You said, educating somebody and them understanding and learning are two different things. Telling and applying are two different things. So it's an intentional step in the process and one that we know is critical to successful outcomes because, the ROI of a change comes from ability, not from training, right? It's once people are able to work in the new environment that we actually get the benefits of the change that's being introduced.
Where would you see usually resistance heightens up?
Yeah, and that happens, right? We know from research that, resistance peaks at the time of go live, whatever the go live event is, because that's when everything feels quite real. But I'd also say we really, at ProSci, we've been doing a lot of reframing, especially with, the new extension of demonstrating ADKAR in use and in practice and the benefits and results is to think about ADKAR as your tool for change readiness that will eliminate a significant amount of the resistance that could occur or would occur otherwise. So instead of talking about change resistance, it's so much more positive to talk about change readiness. And the reason people get resistant to change is they weren't made ready for those changes. So readiness versus resistance is a great conversion. And then once you see resistance happening, you can get to the root cause and say, well, it could be on the technical side of the change. The solution that's being implemented may miss the mark, right? The requirements weren't defined correctly, or the solution that was developed, the process, the system, the role clarity that we intended just didn't land, whatever it is. So then you can just get to that emergent resistance. And so much of what we could have smoothed the process from the current state to the future state occurs by intentionally helping everyone through those ADKAR journeys.
Talking about the emerging resistance, and it's actually a very valid topic, I want to ask you maybe bordering on a philosophical question. Is it in our nature, Karen, to resist change anyway, regardless of what you do? Is that part of who we are as humans?
Resistance to change is something that, you can talk to psychologists, neuroscientists. You can talk at the psychology of change. The people talk about, fight and flight and the things that feel very threatening to us, right? And a threat could just be a threat to my knowledge base. It could be a threat to my ego. It could be a threat to, where I see myself in the future, because the organization's going in a path that I didn't plan for when I was mapping out what my journey was going to look like. So there's lots of places it can derive from. And there's always going to be something that's natural about resistance. It is one of those, as humans, right? Anytime we're feeling any sense of threat, right? There's a fight or flight response to that. But I think that we're also quite capable of putting the logic around why resistance might occur and figuring out how to head it off before it does. And I've been involved in many large scale change journeys where, the day that the change is live, right? Let's just say it's a systems change and we're turning on new tools and going live with a replacement platform of technology. And all of a sudden you're looking around waiting for the resistance to come up, and it just doesn't, because we engaged people in the process. They had input into the design of the solution. They gave us the opportunity to share what they were most concerned about early in the process. And we went to root cause and mitigation early in the cycles. And we gave them the language to ask for what they needed in the change process. And all of those things lend themselves to an incredibly smooth introduction of change. And of course, things are going to pop up and you're going to have unanticipated results or responses, or somebody has been sitting in the sideline waiting for something to go wrong and pouncing on it. But that's where you engage your leaders and you engage your people managers and give them the skills to coach people and to help them, be the resistance managers at the front line. But, I'm not one to believe that, resistance can completely be eliminated, but it sure can be mitigated and managed throughout the process.
My personal belief is that, of course, they're going to have to be suspicious about the change. That is normal. That's natural. In fact, if I've got complete apathy to change, then I should be worried. Because
I would too, right? If it's too quiet,
yes,
right, then people aren't listening, right? When they're responding and they've been giving, the safety of speaking up, and there's a culture of listening and understanding what their concerns are. That is so culture building. It is so resonating to people to feel like their voice matters and to be part of the process. And after all, really, that's what we all want, right? We want to be appreciated and to be part of the process and know that our voice matters and that I'm bringing something to this conversation. I see something that others don't. And I love those conversations. To me, those are the places where you find the little cracks that if we can hit them now, right, the end product is going to be so much better. But if it's too quiet, to me, that's a warning sign that they're waiting or they're not paying attention.
Yeah. Talking about management, and I think you mentioned that in your response, how important is it to educate management on the ADKAR model?
Yeah, it's critical. It's two different things, right? ADKAR introduces a mindset that we can describe the individual change process. It's back to sense making, right? ADKAR makes change make sense. And it's so simple in its elegance of clarity around each of the milestones that ADKAR describes. The ADKAR is an outcome. It's not an activity. Awareness is an outcome, not an activity. Communication is the activity. Awareness is the outcome. Training is an activity. Knowledge is the outcome. Coaching is an activity. Ability and reinforcement are the outcomes. So to put that into oh my gosh, I've seen some of the most amazing coaching conversations through the lens of ADKAR. Do you know why this change is happening? Yes, I'm fully on board. Have you chosen to participate? Yes, I get it. I understand the benefits to the organization and what's in it for me. Do you have the knowledge that you need? Yes, I do. I feel comfortable. What about ability? And I go, there's a problem there, right? I was the subject matter expert on the software we're shutting down. I'm really threatened by that. How can we step me into that role in the new environment? And the people manager now has a place to have a really purposeful conversation with very specific interventions for a particular person. So it's mindset and tool set. And it's one of those things that just becomes intuitive, right? I can look at a situation and immediately assess the sponsor's not engaged, or the people managers don't know how to support their people. And the people in the organization don't want the change practitioner or the project leaders to do that work. Mm-hmm. They want their own managers or supervisors to come alongside them. It's like I walk in and they go, who are you and why are you here? But I can sit down with that people leader and say, if you do this conversation or you look at the challenge through the lens of ADKAR, look what's available to you, right? You can see what it is. You can look around and it can make sense. You can engage with others in the organization with the common language and the common understanding of that individual change process. And what I've heard in senior leaders, middle line managers, frontline managers, is how much confidence it boosts and how efficient it is, that you don't get lost in the tangential things around change, but you have very purposeful conversations and you give people a chance to engage in a way that they feel seen and heard, but also it's in the intention of helping them through the process. So it's quite useful. And to me, universally, it should be part of, management training programs to introduce this. I do sponsor briefings and I do people manager training, and ADKAR, people just resonate so quickly. And I get emails all the time. I did one last week for a group of people leaders. And the response was, ADKAR is so empowering for me in my leadership role. So I think it should be universal. It teaches us to see things differently and to respond differently.
And that's, I think you mentioned the idea that a change manager becomes the coach for the manager of the team, because we need them to be on board. They will be the one sharing the messages, not us.
Yes.
And I want to shift gear, and I want to ask you about, and by the way, I just want to, for clarification, that ADKAR applies in an agile methodology and then a normal, waterfall methodology, whatever that is, actually applies. It applies as an individual, at a team level, at an organizational level. I'm testing my knowledge here, Karen. But I want to share with you something that I've been experimenting with, and please give me, critique my work. I've been using generative AI nowadays to help me, a Copilot in Microsoft, to actually help me with my planning, with looking at what areas perhaps I need to analyze more and pay attention to more. Is that a conversation that you started to hear nowadays about? Absolutely.
And, Prosci's early development already, we have an AI engine called Kaya that leverages our over 25 years of research in this space. And, the amazing thing is it's like the first draft. So if I'm going to be doing, a briefing with a sponsor, I've got a client next week I'm going to be working with that I've been told the client sponsor, the senior leader, sees the value of change management, but they just don't really understand their role in change management. What is it that I need to do? So I can, look at, the research and go to Kaya or the generative AI tools and say, what are the key points? What are the 3 things I should tell a senior leader about the importance of their role of being an effective sponsor of change? And immediately it's research based. I get, 3 answers quickly. And then I can look at it and say, okay, now in this context, do those make sense? So I feel like the fast first, right? The fast first draft, build me a 2-hour workshop for people leaders and what should be on the agenda. Boom, boom, boom. You have to introduce ADKAR. You need to talk about their role, all the things that we know from our research and our practice. So I feel like it's, it's like an intern sitting there next to me. I can say, hey, run me a quick first draft. And then I can use my knowledge and intuition and my context, right? We have to take it into the context of an organization. So what is the culture of the organization? What is the history of that particular senior leader? What is the style of people engagement inside of an organization? Are there key influencers I can reach out to? I mean, those are where my knowledge and intuition kick in. But absolutely, I can get a fast first draft of, steps and actions that's research informed that helps me, focus on the intuition side versus on the building side. Does that make sense?
Thoroughly love the idea of a fast first. I'll use that actually today, Karen. So thank you for that. Actually, sometimes generative AI can give you the fast second as well. So
absolutely,
if you're
right. The second right answer, right? Because once you get to that place of intuition and you can say, tell me more here, right? I want to push into this nuance or this pattern. But it's telling me what it knows from the body that it's been given. So sometimes the collection of what it's reacting to isn't everything that it needs, because again, there's so many disciplines that come into play. There's so many adjacencies to change work in other disciplines that, again, that's where you could sit down with a team of people and say, here's our fast first or even better second. And then you put your intuition and your knowledge against it, and you end up with a really good outcome from that process.
My application recently was when I had a first meeting with a group of, with a project group. And I was able to obviously summarize the meeting using generative AI. And I questioned, based on all the transcription, I've asked Copilot, which is a Microsoft application, to, based on the ADKAR model, to really highlight where the issue is. And it was actually giving me good rationale around awareness is probably okay, but somebody mentioned this and Ali mentioned this, and based on all of those nuances, I've got a case to think, well, perhaps I need to focus on what's in it for them, and this is what's going to come back in my communication. Again, when I reemphasize the point that you mentioned, the context is important, and that's where we come as a human in the loop when it comes to generative AI.
Absolutely, because the culture is the culture of an organization. I've worked in so many different organizations over the years, and sometimes the culture is quite hierarchical, and other times it is much more collaborative. And if I'm in a hierarchical, top-down driven scenario, I'm going to recommend different tactics than if it's in a very, collaborative. And, a tactic in a collaborative environment is to get people together and, do the problem solving and the pattern spotting as a team versus trying to help a leader of an organization do that cascade, right? And top down, we have to be an effective cascade, scenario, right? We have to have the tactics to cascade the message versus, delivering the co-created solutions. So context is critical. And I think the AI tools are going to be amazing aids to us in the process to free up that research time, thinking time, and put it into the more intuition, application, and what we do, day to day to fit inside of the context that we're working in.
I love this. Thank you. I am aware of time. There's a question that I want to ask you. What would be your advice to me? I've been in the business of change for quite a while. What would be your advice for people like me to rethink and maybe revise the way we look at ADKAR from where you sit?
Yeah, what I know to be true, and this is, bears out in research and in application, is the 5 elements of ADKAR have not changed since Jeff Hyatt imagined the model and articulated it in the 1990s. And the reason is it is the description of that individual change process. It is the process that every single one of us goes through to adopt and sustain a change. So the model itself hasn't changed. What has changed is all of the different ways that we contextualize ADKAR. So whether it's project milestones, you mentioned waterfall versus agile, you can have knowledge and ability outcomes at each release or sprint. You can embed ADKAR from, a milestone project planning perspective. You can also use it as a diagnostic framework to go back and examine what went wrong and what can we do better the next time. So I think it's more in the applications of ADKAR and going way beyond, right? If it's an onion, you're just peeling back all of the layers. And, even to the point where we think of ADKAR as, the building of change capability, and to build change capability through the lens of ADKAR. because we have a current state, we have a future state, we have people who are impacted, we have the journeys. So I would say, it's just continue to push into the applications, and, it continues to be true. It continues to grow in relevance and use because it does represent what happens in reality, and it makes it such an actionable framework. So I'd say, when you're ready and people are ready to go deeper than the individual model, start looking at all the advanced applications of ADKAR.
I love this. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, Karen. How would people connect with you?
Yeah, the best way to connect with me, you can, for information on Prosci, of course, reach out to, prosci.com. I'm available to be connected in LinkedIn. That's my sweet spot for where I spend my time and spend most of my professional connections. So it's Karen Ball 26 at LinkedIn. And I'd love for people to reach out and ask these deep dive questions. The more we think about this together, the better outcomes we're all going to achieve.
I love that. And you mentioned the word outcome so many times. So congratulations. It's you got your message loud and clear during the podcast. I hope I can get you back, Karen, in the future at some stage and talk more about the advancement of the model and the applications in particular and the stories. But until next time, stay well and stay safe, Karen. And thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Ali. Great spending time with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining me on the Inner Game of Change. I hope today's conversation offered you something to reflect on, something to challenge, or something to carry forward in your journey of change and growth. As always, I'm grateful for your time, your curiosity, and your willingness to explore the inner game that shapes the outer impact. I will leave you with this thought. Change is hard at first, messy in the middle, and gorgeous at the end. That's what Robin Sharma said. Until next time, take care and keep leading with courage and curiosity.
Is on the simplification of the language, right? To, the way to get something out to more people is it needs to make sense, right? And then it needs to be useful, right? Usable and useful. And that's what we know to be true. ADKAR is incredibly usable and useful. And, we're better off with it than we would be without.
I love this.